The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of your elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesies rightly about you, hypocrites. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold a human tradition." Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by doing it can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Well, for people like me, the fact that we are in the Gospel of Mark is the good news. We have been in the Gospel of John for 6 weeks, and we have now moved back to the Gospel of Mark, which again, to most people, is not a big deal, but we actually get to talk about something besides bread today, which is also refreshing for people like me. So this morning, we are back in the Gospel of Mark, for it is from within. It is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come. Ouch. Ouch. Right? This is one of those, if you're going to Scripture to get that fuzzy Hallmark kind of feeling, this is one of those that you're not going to find in one of those cards. That it comes from within. When we find ourselves or find the world or find others off the rails, and at the end of the gospel we hear what that might mean. We can blame people, places, and things because we're human. But at the end of the day, if we really find ourselves in a place where we don't care about anything, it's probably something broken in our heart. It's some way that we are trying to keep, and maybe we're not even trying. Maybe we just want to keep God's grace or God's direction. Maybe we don't want to hear, maybe you played a part in that little shenanigans. Maybe some of that was yours. We hear Jesus is beginning to teal with all the, the Pharisees are like, so your disciples aren't doing everything perfectly. Mary, you are out of the church. No more reading. Of course not, my God, people. The Pharisees are like, oh, they're not washing the dishes. But in all fairness to the Pharisees and to the tradition, they felt like those actions were of utter importance, that was a show of faith and tradition. But it doesn't make up who they are. It doesn't constitute who they are or what their life might be. Our external world, we spend so much time trying to look right, do right, be right, whatever that means. And what does it mean to you? What does it matter that you come to church? What does it matter that you manage to think, geez, I think I'm a person of faith? We can all decide, depending on where we are in the world, we can read the news and pick out a particularly bad actor and say, that particularly bad actor is a particularly bad person. But let's make it a little subtler for a minute. Years ago when I was in a church, and it really was years ago, I'm not just saying that to cover anybody up, it really was a long time ago. We were about ready to have this baptism. And as happens in many times of baptisms, people that aren't used to being in church come to church, primarily family members. And it was a big day. It was kind of a festive service. I don't even remember what time of year it was, but what I remember was I was just starting off in the process. I was a newbie, and I'm standing in the back, and we had prepared the family for this big and wonderful day. And off to the right, I'm standing in the back and I'm looking forward, and I see this kind of a hubbub. Of course, hubbub. Off I go to be helpful in the hubbub, right? And there's this woman who has been at this church since, as Kevin would say, Christ was an altar boy. This woman was a long-time member of the church. Not that it should matter, but let's make this a little more uncomfortable. She was a very big pledger. Yeah, some of you that have been on the vestry know that shouldn't matter, but she not only had been in this church for a long time, she also was a very big pledger, and she was causing a bit of a hubbub. So off I go. Well, this poor family had sat in her pew. And if you think this was funny to her, I'm telling you, it wasn't funny to her. And it wasn't like in the front row. It was just, this woman was like, but anyway. So, and I'm, of course, many of you know me, I try to be the peacemaker. It's like, welcome these people. And I try to introduce her to this new family, thinking maybe they ever want to come to church again, ever, which we never saw them again. I don't care where they come from. This is my pew. Now they know, so now they can move. Now, I was a baby intern. I was learning. I was like those of you here last year. I was kind of like Nicole. I was kind of like, okay. So I shepherded the family to another pew. I didn't want to badmouth the elder, but I wanted to say, I'm really sorry, she's such a jerk. But I didn't, because I was trying to practice what I'm trying to preach, right? It is from within the human heart that evil intentions come. We could sit here, and I mean, this was years ago. I've been ordained for almost 20 years, so this stuck with me. Not because, well, there are many reasons. Partially, I knew this woman, and I knew she was a good lady. I knew she was a bit, if we're being honest, just between us kids, she's a bit stuffy. But, maybe I'm not stuffy, so maybe she doesn't like she liked me. She just didn't want anyone in her pew, and she didn't care. Now, this isn't world peace. That child got baptized, and
we did not see the family again, but can't imagine why. I hope they found a good community of faith, because they didn't feel particularly well. But we were all nice to them. The child is baptized, the child is part of the community of God. But God and Jesus are trying to tell us this morning that sometimes it's not all about the rules. And most of the time, I would say all, but I'm sure there's some, most of the time it's not about us. Shocking, I know. The churches were formed. Jesus came to say, we're called to gather together, to worship and pray, to help each other heal and grow along the journey, to help each other learn about Scripture and God when we tell each other our stories. My guess is that many of you, even if you've known each other a long time, if you were to sit down and tell each other your stories, you'd still be surprised about the intimacy that some people feel about God. Because that's still kind of personal. I mean, still kind of like too personal almost. I mean, we can talk about sex, right? We can talk about sex till the cows come home. We can talk about what we think people should do and what they shouldn't do, but let's not talk about money. It's funny when you look at the end, all the things that Jesus lists. You know, we can look at the commandments and say, I'm good. No adultery here, check. Excellent. You know, been good to my parents today. Of course, it was easy. They're both with God, so that was easy. But check. You know, so I can go through the commandments. No, I don't happen to be. You may be a person that thinks guns are a good idea. I don't happen to be, so I have not hurt or maimed anybody with a weapon. Excellent. I may have hurt somebody with my mouth. That's always the case. I'm always apologizing for that because I just speak. But we never look at things like greed because we don't use words like avarice anymore. I don't. I think if I did, people would start to wonder what was wrong with me. Hoarding money and greed and holding that above God. I always pronounce licentiousness. I may still have pronounced it wrong. Those of you know, is that okay? Okay. But I had to look it up. Do you use that all the time? No, we know we're not supposed to sleep with our neighbor, but we're supposed to have good morals. We're supposed to have our values kind of be in line with who we are. Like being here and knowing God should matter. Because this woman and her that morning had such an impact on me. A number of years ago, I was the rector of a small church in Sanbornville. And I'm still thinking about it, and I had two particular women who I adored, and they both sat in the exact same pew. And I never really asked them why. And I preached some kind of sermon like this about this, because this, I mean, it made its mark. And so I preached some kind of sermon about this, and at announcements. And this was a pretty small congregation, and everybody knew each other, and many of them had known each other since forever. One of them raises her hand, and she goes, I just need to tell you why. And she stands up in front of the whole congregation. It was one of the most moving moments, and I'm like, I wasn't trying to, it's okay, ma'am. No. And she's like, oh, no. I need to tell you why. You see that window? That one, not particular, but she was pointing to the window she sat beside. That's my relative. On this morning, I don't remember which one, but that's my relative. And he was so important to me. And I feel like when I come in and I sit here, I'm closer to him. But she stands up, she looks around, if any of you want to sit here, or to come sit with me, let me tell you about so-and-so. And she said, and then not to be undone, Alberta stands up and says, I need to tell you why I sit here. You would have loved these women. I still love these women. Kirsten does too. Alberta stood up and said, I have been in this church since I was this big, and my whole family sat in this pew. When I come in the morning, I can still see my mom and dad. So I come in and I talk to all my friends, and I come in and I sit here. But she too looked up and said, but you can come sit with me. You all already know my parents, so you know why I love them, but you can come. We get to, especially as Episcopalians, we're people of routine. I'm sure, we're also New England. We have that going against us. We're New Englanders, we're Episcopalians. I have good friends that are Congregationalists. They have the same plight. We like repetition. We like order. We like comfort. That's okay. Many of you sit in the same places. Sally has company with her today, but she's in her pew. We sit in the same places. But I also know as I look out at each one of you, because I'm lucky enough to know you, that if somebody came, you wouldn't berate them and kick them out of their pew because it was yours. These are kind of fun examples, and they're examples that we can kind of hear. But we all know that the world right now, we are all so busy. So-and-so should be this, and so-and-so should... we need to stop and breathe, all of us, when we can. If your only prayer today is to try and stop and breathe and take a breath, and remember that we are all beloved children of God, whether or not somebody knows that or believes that, you certainly don't need to shove it down their throat or tell them, I'm just going to be nice to you today because you're being a jerk, but you're a beloved child of God, so I'm going to be nice to you today. It's not exactly the matter. You can do that work internally, though, because it does help. I have walked away from some conversations thinking, but with God's help and many years of practice, I'm getting very old now, I know how to keep my mouth shut, and if I have to walk away. Sometimes that's the biggest gift, right? Sometimes we can't always be this paragon of virtue. Sometimes our best action is to close our mouth and move. Because we don't always, I will still leave a situation thinking I'm right. I don't know, I may change on my deathbed, but I get opinionated. So I can still pretty much guarantee that there are situations I'm still gonna leave thinking I'm right. But the other person doesn't need that. For it is from within the human heart that evil intentions come. Remember, most of those evil intentions are those broken places. They're those places where because of some circumstance in our life, we feel less than. Because of some circumstance in our life, we feel like we're not worthy. Because of some circumstance in our life, we don't feel like we belong or we're loved or we're cared about. And that those parts, if we never, ever let God's light shine in those parts of ourselves, it is impossible for us to be able to let God heal us. I will tell you a funny story before I end, because this is different church, older woman, matriarch, lots of money, really adorable. I have nothing against money. It's just these two women have that in common. I should say that. So she parked her car, and she parallel parked her car, and she's trying to get out of the parking lot. And everybody knew her, because again, she'd been in this church forever and ever. She put it in reverse, bam, hit the car behind her. Who she knew? Okay, she put it in drive, bam, hit the car in front of her. Not really hard. Neither were really hard, and she would tell you they were taps. So then she kind of turned her wheel a little bit, put it in reverse, kind of like bumper cars. And here she is in her cute little hat, and she goes to church, came to church every Sunday for most of her life. And then she put it in drive, little tap. Now, by this time, everybody's watching. And nobody knows what to do because nobody's kind of like, what do we do? Do we go? What do we do? The funny thing is I have no idea what they did. I obviously didn't manage the situation. I think what I remember is that she did eventually do the bumper car thing, so she got out and drove away. Good news is she didn't do any big damage. And I do remember, because talking about this with people that were trying to help her, saying, you know, maybe you need to not do this. And she was very clear that she thought it was just tapping. People, we are all broken. We are all whole and happy and healing, but we are all just, you know, doing the best we can. This lady was doing the best she could. She didn't have evil intent. She didn't want to hit anybody's. Good news is nobody's car was damaged. It was just kind of funny. But we are all doing the best we can, most of us. And none of us. If you believe you are perfect, okay. I've been at this people thing for a while, and that can be a problem in and of itself. God is calling us to take that breath, especially in the world we live in right now, where it is so easy to take sides and have things. To take a breath, to step back, to try and say, okay, where am I in this story? Where am I in this story? I really like my pew. But but what do I do with it? I like my way of being. I like fill in the blank. But let it not turn into an idol. Let it not turn into something that draws you away from God or your relationship with God or your feeling about God. Let it just be something that gives you pause or notice. And then what would your next actions be? Let us remember that the commandments, some of them, it's good to get the check marks, but some of the more insidious ones we forget about. Because sin and evil are insidious. So, you know, maybe it's just a tap.